This Hangout on Air is live, so welcome to another fine VJug session. This time we are talking about testing and refactoring legacy code by a good friend of mine, Sandro. Sandro, hi, welcome to the VJug.
Thank you, Simon.
You're looking super relaxed there.
Yes, I'm lying on my bed. That's how I like to code.
So okay, before we get started, then a couple of points. Actually, first I should say hey to Oliver. Oliver, is your camera working today? Yes, it is. Hey, Oliver, how you doing?
I'm just quiet abnormally, you know.
Cool. So a couple of things then. First, I wanted to mention. First of all, with the new website, let me share my screen and you can see some of the funky new additions to the website. Right. Can you see my screen?
Oh yeah.
You can see my screen. Awesome. So this is the new cool website, as you're all much aware. Hopefully you're watching through this website. A couple of new things that have changed then. Live session, obviously still identical, apart from some sharing buttons at the bottom. So please do click on one of these. Say something cool about the VJug. Hey, I just do share so that we can make the VJug bigger and stronger. Other things I want to show you, you can now join the VJug much easier through this big button on the site. It'll actually take you to a meetup join page. Some nice made-up statistics about why you should join. Other things, we now have all our past sessions listed below, and if you click the more content, you can view all our previous sessions rather than just our most recent sessions. So do check them out. Even further below, we now have future sessions. So this one is currently the testing and refactoring legacy. From here, you can RSVP to an event. So here, this is a new one which was announced today. Highly strung, understanding your type system. You can RSVP directly through the new website. Plus, you can click on these to add to your Google Calendar or download an iCal doc as well. So please do that, and it's got a much higher chance of viewing that. Other than that, that's pretty much it for the site. So hopefully you're on there. The only other thing I wanted to mention is the new session. Whoops, let me go.
On your screen.
Yeah, there we go.
I love it.
I know. How's that? The only other thing I wanted to mention is that we do have the new session which I announced earlier today, understanding the type system, and that's going to be another session in our software craftsmanship month. Oliver, anything you wanted to add?
Well, I just heard some cool news that Geek Out has come to the UK, and it's announced for October 16th. And right now there's some early bird cheapo tickets that are great for any UK residing geeks. Is that true?
That is absolutely true. Yeah, it's a one-day event happening in London. Currently only £49. So if you're in London, London-based, or even in Europe, or even in the US, why not come down, have a good excuse to visit London? And we're talking about lots of topics all around productivity and how you can be a better developer. Some kick-ass speakers, including Aaron Gupta, Josh Long, some previous VJug speakers as well. So, without further ado, I'll hand over to my good friend from the LJC and the Software Craftsmanship London group, Sandro. And Sandro is going to be giving a heavily code-oriented session. So, lots of comments, please, lots of discussion in IRC. He'll be holding questions till the end, so if you have any questions, do drop them in IRC and log into the IRC site through the VJug or virtualjug.com site. Ask all your questions there, and I'll pose them to Sandro at the end. So enough said. Sandro, over to you. Welcome to the VJug, and have a great session.
Thanks, Simon. So I think that if you want to, I need to share my screen, I suppose. So what shall I? Desktop. Start sharing screen. Can you see my screen?
I can see the codurance.com homepage.
Yeah, so if you want to know more about what I do and what I've been up to, so that's our company, and so just click around and you figure out. So I won't bore you with all the details. So I'll jump straight to this session. So I have just like a handful of slides so we all know what we are doing. So first of all, what this session is about. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of legacy code. It's a small one, so you will need to be creative. You need to imagine that this is a 3,000 lines. Unfortunately, I cannot use 3,000 lines in a 1-hour session, so be creative. But I took this small piece of code, and that it has problems that you find in the vast majority of legacy codes out there in Java. So I'm going to take it. I'm going to write tests until it's 100% tested. And then once I have the safety net, then I will refactor it and make it better. So very quickly, I'll be using Eclipse for this one. I normally use IntelliJ, so if I'm slow while I'm typing, it's because I'm trying to find the wrong shortcut. So this is the code under test. So it's quite small, but normally you will take at least 30 seconds to 60 seconds to try to figure out what it does. I won't bore you with that right now. So before we jump into that, I'll say a few things. Imagine a social networking like your Facebook, but for travelers. So the business requirements for that piece of code is if you are not logged in into the website, you cannot see any trips. If you are logged in, but you are not friends with the user, with a random user, you cannot see the content of that user. And if you are logged in and you are friends with a specific user, then you are allowed to see the trips from that user. So that's what this piece of code is about, is the back end of this website. So the rules that I use for legacy code, I try not to change production code if it's not covered by tests, which means that I try not to type on the production code. So all the refactorings, because the production code in a legacy code, it was not written to be tested, which means that when you start writing tests for that code, the code is not ready for it, so you need to change it. But the only exception that I make is I just use the automated refactoring tools to make the code, well, to allow the code to be tested. But I try not to type into the production code until I have all my tests. So this is probably the biggest takeaway from this session. I will get back to it at the end. So code, mainly inside a method, has this notion of shallowest branches, shallow branches and deep branches. So I don't know if you can you see my mouse, Simon? Can you see my mouse?
Yeah, I can see it.
All right, cool. So this is the shallowest branch, right? So for example, imagine having here, and then you jump into here. That's a shallowest branch. This is a deepest branch. So when I'm working with legacy, once again, be creative. Think that this is far bigger than it really is. I don't try to understand everything in one go. What I do is I take the shallowest branch first. I just understand that bit, and I write a test that represents that behavior. And then I move on to the second shallowest branch. Just understand that, write a test that represents that behavior, and keep moving until I reach the deepest branch. This way, you build or learn your knowledge bit by bit, your test suite bit by bit, and when you get to the deepest branch, then you are ready to refactor. When I'm refactoring, I do it exactly the other way around. I go to the deepest branch first, ignore everything else, because the deepest branch receives everything that it needs to do its job. So it's much easier to start refactoring from there. And then I start extracting methods from the deepest branch, and then the code automatically starts collapsing from inside out. So that's the approach. This code that I showed you is the strip service, that is the class under test. It has two problems. Well, it has quite a few problems, but those are the two major ones. It talks to a singleton, that is the user session, and it talks to a static method in a trip DAO. And those are the things that you normally face when dealing with legacy code, that is these hardwired dependencies that you need to isolate them so you can test. So let's just jump through it. So as I said, the first thing that I do, I ignore the entire code base. I don't try to look at the whole thing. I just say, what is the shallowest branch? So here I'm declaring some variables, nothing interesting. Then here I go to the user session, get the logged in user, and then I have the shallowest branch. So if the logged in user is null, it throws an exception. I ignore everything else. So that's what I care about. So there is some validation of the logged in user there. So that's what I do. So first, I should validate. And this validation, we expect.
Hey, Sandro. Hey, Sandro.
Yes, listening.
I think when you're typing, the Hangout mutes you. So if you speak while you're not typing, that'll probably make it better.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, sorry about that.
These will be interesting. So you need to bear with me because when I keep speaking while I'm typing. Okay, so what I've done, the way that I go about my test is I have the class name here, the trip service, and I start with should, and then I should be able to complete the sentence. So trip service should validate the logged in user. So that forces me to write my test according to the behavior and not to technical implementation. So now I'm gonna write this test according to the behavior that I want from the shallowest branch. So I'm gonna start typing now. So that would be my test. I'm using this at the bottom here. There is this red bar. This red bar is called Infinite Test. It's a plugin for Eclipse. You have that for IntelliJ as well. Every time that I save my file, it will run my tests for me. So you know that every time that I save, it runs my test. You see if it's red or green. So when you are testing legacy code, so that's my test. Basically, I just should invoke the method, and I should get this exception because there's no logged in user. When testing legacy code, this should go green straight away. And the reason is because I'm testing a behavior that already exists. So when you have a red, it's because something is wrong. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see my stack trace, but I'll tell you what's going wrong here. When I execute this test, this line here was executed, the user session. On purpose, just for the sake of this exercise, I made all my collaborators, that is the user session and my trip DAO, to throw a, let me just quit my, to throw a collaborator call exception. The reason that I've done that is, let me just move this. The reason that I've done that was because in my unit test, I don't want my collaborators to be invoked. So if I get this exception, it's because the test is invoking the collaborators, and I don't want that. So that's the first challenge. I need to isolate my collaborators so I can unit test this class, because I don't want to have a full web service running so I can have the HTTP session. The way to do that is you create what is called a seam. So I need to create a seam between these two classes. The way that I do that, I create a protected method. I'll show you. So this method now is the seam. This is where the two classes meet. So now for my tests, what I can do is this. And then I override the method that I created. So now I override the method that I created. And then I make this method here. It's almost like doing your own mocking. So I make the logged in, the user session to return null to the logged in user. And I start using the testable one. So as soon as I do that, then my test goes automatically to green. So that's pretty cool. And I can use my code to show me where I am. So this notion of shallowest branch and deepest branch, using this approach, using a code coverage tool is awesome because it shows exactly what you are, or where you are. In a legacy code, in a much larger method, there may be many points that you return the same thing. Like different points in the code will return true, or will throw the same exception. So you need to make sure that you are not getting a false positive in your test. So showing your code coverage tools will help you to know where you are and what you need to do next. So this is awesome. I moved forward. I had my first test running, but this test sucks, and I tell you why. So the test is all about, like, should validate the logged in user. The test is all about the logged in user. But if you look at my test, where is the logged in user? The subject of the test is nowhere to be seen. So that's when you need to start fixing your test. So I'm going to introduce the logged in user. So we know what a logged in user means in a website. But in this case, we want the logged in user not to be logged in, not to be logged in. So I didn't know what to call it. And quite often when you are writing tests and writing code, we don't know how to name things. Naming things is very difficult. So I had to find out what would be the opposite of logged in user. So that's the point that you go to your business analyst or your product owner or whoever is in charge of the requirements and ask these questions. And I learned that in a website, the person that is not logged in is a guest. You call it. And then you start creating these things. So let's create a field. And let's create this guest. That is a null. And now we make the session, the logged in user that comes to the session, be whatever you set it to be. And now here is pretty bad. So let's say there is some sort of method at this point. So now I have a guest that I'm far happier that has the logged in user. We say the logged in user is a guest, so no one is logged in. And when I get the trips by some user, then you say you are not logged in. So that's what we wanted. And now I'm ready to move forward. The next step, looking on the right side, I need to find the second shallowest branch. So the second shallowest branch is this one. So this is the deepest because this flag is set here in this line. So the deepest, the second shallowest branch is when the users are not friends, then I should get no trips. So I'm going to write a test that represents this behavior. So let's say should not. So should not return any trips when users are not friends. So let's implement that. Never do copy and paste. Copy and paste is bad, is evil, right? So now I need a registered user. And let's create. And I need the logged in user not to be friends with the user that she wants to see the trip. So I'm going to say, sorry, I keep speaking while I'm typing, so it must be a bit crazy for you. So I need a stranger here. So the logged in user is not friends with the other person. So I create a stranger. This stranger is a normal user, so this user has friends and has trips. So let's create some of them. So now I have a stranger that has another, is friends with another user, has a trip to Brazil, and so when we try to see the trips, let's create these things. Let's create this trip. So import. Oops. So now I need to assert something. So now I have the registered user, the logged in user, trying to see the trips from a stranger. So of course that it should get no trips. So that's my test, and as you can see, it's green. So if I run my code coverage, as you can see, I moved on. So now I have a test that check when the users are not friends, I should see no trips. So I could move on, but now I need to start removing duplication. So the cycle, the TDD cycle, the red-green refactor, is still valid for legacy. And the refactoring, the first thing that you do is try to remove duplication. So I'm instantiating the trip service twice, so we can do something about it. Let's create a field for that. So cool. So now I move the trip service instantiation to a before method. So now the only thing that is missing is when the users are friends, then I should see the trips back. So I should be able to see the trips. So now I need a test that mimics that. So once again, never do copy and paste. So what I need now is this stranger needs to be a friend. And let's create another. So let's make the two to be friends. Oops. IntelliJ, Control D, duplicate the line, Eclipse deletes the line. So now I have a friend that is friends with the registered user, has 2 trips, and I want this to be true. So as soon as I saved it, I got an error in my test. Once again, it shouldn't be the case. It should go green straight away. The reason that is failing, if I run my JUnit manually, it's showing another, throwing another collaboration call exception, a collaborator call exception, which means that the problem is here, is now executing this method in here on my collaborator. So in the real life, this would go to the database, and we don't want that in a unit test. So this is throwing the collaborator call exception. So I need to isolate that again. So I'm going to use the same trick that I used for the session, create another theme. So I normally combine the name of my methods with the name of the parameter, so that gives you better readability. I use that a lot. So I create another theme isolating the static call. So now I need to do something about it on the other side, on my testable class. So let's override this method. And let's make it like this call to the database. Let's mock this call to the database to return the trips from the user. So as soon as I do that, then I have a green test. Oops, wrong. And now if I run my code coverage, then I have the whole thing fully covered. Now I could move on, but there is duplication that I want to remove on my test. I need to fix that first. So let's remove these. The user logged in can move to the before method. So now, the reason that I moved that one, because that one is not important. All the tests, this one and this one, they assume that the user is logged in. The only one that is not, that is important to know that the user is not logged in, is this one. So this one I leave it in here because that's important for the test. So now I have 3 blocks in my tests. So the first block is the given part. So given this state. The second block is when. So when I probe my system, when I invoke my system, then this should be true or false or whatever. So it's the whole given when then that we use for acceptance test. That's the same mentality here. So given the state of my system is this, when I invoke my system, then this should be true or false. So that's how I prefer to do things. So this is a great point to stop because we already added some value. You create some tests. So I can go to Git and say, I normally work in very small increments, so everything that I do, I'll try to commit along the way. So now I could, in theory, I should be able to start refactoring this code because now I have the safety net of my tests. But the tests are not great yet. One of the problems that you find in legacy is because the code is quite big, the initial setup of the test, like this one, tends to become quite big when you are working with legacy. So you need to easy that. You need to make it more readable. What I will do, I will just show you how you can use a builder pattern to make it more readable. So instead of reading this like that, I would rather read in this way. So I think that reading this way is much nicer than the other way, and you can combine builders as well. So now the only thing, so I normally write the way I want to read it, and then I make it compile. So now I need to make it compile, and I'm going to create a builder for that. So now I have the class, and I can start creating these methods. Oops. Save it. Just comment this out. Let's comment this out first. So let's start creating this. So in order to chain your methods, you just start returning all the same object, like the string builder, things like that. You just will always return the same object. So we never use 2 parameters, right? It's either 1, 0, or many. Right, so I have, I'm storing the friends. I'll do the same for the trips. Oops. So much. So I have this one, and now I just need the build method that actually will build the user with all the data that I specified. So now I just need to start populating the user. Awesome. So I'm back now. So it took a while, but now the tests are green. And I can delete this. And now I have my user builder. And I can reuse that. I can reuse that in here. Awesome. So now I have the builder. What I can do now is just move it to another class, because I don't want that here, and I want to reuse that in the future. So I just move this type to a new file. So now it will go to its own class. Oh. So now it's gone, and I can statically import these things. That makes. So yeah, so my tests are still green, and now I have a more readable test, and that's a great point to commit as well. Awesome. So now I'm happier with my tests, and I can start refactoring it. So the thing about refactoring is, I'll kill my code coverage. The thing about refactoring, as I said, I normally go to the deepest branch first. The deepest branch is this one. This is the deepest branch. However, this branch of the code does nothing. It just delegates to the trip DAO. So there's nothing that I can do there really for now. So I go to the second deepest branch. That is this one. So this one is an interesting one because, like, if you look at what this code is doing, it's going to the user, getting the friends, the list of friends out, iterating through the friends, and trying to figure out if the logged in user is part of those friends. So is one of those friends. So this is what is called feature envy. It means that the trip service wants to be the user. It envies the users. It gets the state out of the user and does an operation on that state. At least in object-oriented programming, mainly object-oriented, if the behavior is just related to that piece of data, they should be together. So in fact, instead of that's because we should always ask ourselves, like, why is this why is this method so big? And normally, the reason that the method is so big is because the behavior is doing too much, yeah, of course, but is being able to identify where the all these pieces of behavior belong to. So in this case, what I wanted to do is, I wanted to go to the user object and say, user, are you friends with this other user? Because everywhere in this system, in this web application, everywhere where I want to put a comment, I don't know, tag someone, like something, everywhere where I need to know if two users are friends, I will have this for loop. So I want to move it out. I want to move it to the right place. So I want the user to respond if it's friends with someone else. So now I'm going to test drive this behavior. I'm going to go to my user class, and I will test drive this behavior. I want my user to respond that. So first thing to do is, let's create, when you are test driving, you should always try to start with the smallest test that you can think of. So let's try this one. So should inform when users are not friends. So now I need to that's the behavior that I want. That's a very small behavior. So So I create a user that is friends with Paul, and then so what I've done here was, my test is, I created a user that is friends with Paul, and then I ask the user if she's friends with Bob, and of course I expect false. So I'm going to create Paul and Bob now. Awesome. So now I just need the method that I want the user to have. And I just write the simplest code that could possibly satisfy this requirement. So in this case, I just return false. So as soon as I do that, then my test is green, and I have the behavior that I want. So yeah, the test is green, so I have the behavior that I want. So now I need to triangulate. I need the other way around, so I need the opposite. So let's write this test. So what I need now, I need to make the user friends with Bob as well, and these should be true. Cool, so I have a failing test. Now I just implement this behavior. Awesome. So now my user, just removing the stinky unused imports. So now my user has the behavior that I want it to have, fully test-driven, so I can commit now. Cool. So I'm now ready to go back to my trip service and start refactoring, so that this behavior now should be gone. So a few tips when using when refactoring code. So every time that I'm changing, now that I have my test running constantly, as soon as I save it runs a test, I try to stay in the green for as long as possible. All the refactoring that I do one at a time, and I run my tests. So in this case, infinite tests helps me, because as soon as I save, it runs. But if you don't have infinite tests, keep running your tests. So the idea is, I've seen many times, and I've done that many times, when you start refactoring, you have tests, you start refactoring, and because you are refactoring, your tests break. But then you think, oh, no, that's okay. I'm just refactoring my code, so of course it's broken. So at some point, I'll bring that back to green. And then you keep going forever. And then you have no idea how to bring the tests back to green again. And then you don't know if the test makes sense anymore, start deleting tests. So you get into this mess. So what I prefer doing is, one small step, run the test. One small step, run the test. As soon as I do a small step and the tests go red, I stop and I think, am I doing the right thing? Is that a better way of doing that? And if the answer is no, I'm one Ctrl-Z away to be back into green. So one of the biggest problems with legacy is all the variables that you have scattered all over the place. So the first tip is, this flag in here is just used, as you can see where it's highlighted, just used inside the if statement. So let's bring that closer to where it's being used here. So now I can replace the behavior. I can use the method that I created. So if I save it, I'm still in the green. Let's rename this to be named appropriately. So cool. So now I don't need the for loop anymore. I can delete. So as I'm saving, running my tests, one of the things that you want to do in legacy code is you want to get rid of all the variables, all of them. It doesn't matter if you call the same method 1 billion times. get rid of all the variables first. What you want to do, because these methods, these legacy methods, they are entangled. They have multiple levels of nesting. So while you have these nests, you cannot do much. So what you want to do, you want to break these code in blocks. And as soon as you have separate blocks, then you can reason about them independently. So what you want to do first is get rid of all the variables, because variables are declared at the very top and used all over the place. So bring them closer to where they are used, and inline, get rid of them. So I'm going to start inlining variables. So this is friends, I'm going to inline that. So one variable gone. Now I want to break so this guy here is a guard clause. That means that if the logged in user is null, it shouldn't do anything. So you can invert this if. And as soon as you invert this if, you don't need the else. And now I have so this variable here is just used down there. So let's bring that down. So now I have two distinct blocks. One does validation, the other one does some behavior. But now I have a distinct block and I can reason about them independently. But as I said, I want to get rid of all the variables, so I'm going to do that now. So this one first. Let's get rid of this one. So the one way of doing that is like this. So saved, I'm still in the green. So now what I can do is just return. I can just return from here as well. And so as you can see, I didn't go to the red once, but it may happen in larger code base. But you need to try to keep on the green as for as long as possible. So now I don't need that variable anymore. And I can inline this one as well. And now that I have a symmetrical if in here, I can just do this. Oops. Awesome. So now that whole monster is gone, and I'm much happier now. So it's a good point to commit as well. So the code is way better now. You could say, okay, I'm done. I could stop in here. But so up until now, I was doing refactoring, preserving the behavior and making the code better. But this code has a few problems. There are a few things that you should know, right? This thing in here, this disgusting thing here, this is a hack, right? The only reason it's bullshit is because your code is highly coupled. You have no option. You need to do that. But once you solve it and you are able to test your code, then you can start working on redesigning your code a little bit better. By the name of the class under test, there is a trip service. It's implied that this class belongs to the backend of the web app. So why on earth does it know about user sessions, HTTP sessions? Why is it coupled to my delivery mechanism that is the web? So what I want is to receive the logged in user as a parameter. I don't want to go to the session. So now I'm going to change this code to do that. I'm going to make a refactoring that is quite a bit dangerous. So I'm going to introduce a new parameter to the method that is the logged in user. The side effect of it is that I'll show you first. I'll do it first. So I introduced the logged in user as a parameter here. And of course, that my Eclipse was quite kind to change all the calls to that method and pass null to this call. So that means all the production code calling this method now is passing null. So you would need to go there and fix and now where the method is being called, do the user session thing, get logged in user. And then you would need to fix all of them until you get rid of it. But so you know. So now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna fix it. So registered user, and this one here is the guest. Awesome. So my tests are still green. That's awesome. But I'm not using the new parameter anywhere. I'm still using the method. So if you click in here, you see that is the method that's been used. So now I want to use the new parameter that I created. So for that, I just need to do this. So as soon as I save it, I'm seeing the green. So that means that I don't need the method anymore. So I make it private. It's not being used. I can delete. And then I need to fix my tests. So I'm back into the green. So now I broke one of the dependencies, and this is a great point to stop again. So it's not injected, it's passed as a parameter, but that's okay. So one thing that is very interesting with this change is as you start fixing your design, your tests become simpler. So I start deleting lines in here. So the only one that is missing now is my trip DAO. I want to get rid of it. I want to be able to inject it and control it myself and mock it. The only problem is that a static method is difficult to mock. I hate power mock. I'm not going to use power mock. So if you thought about suggesting that I could use power mock, the answer is no. I'm not going to use it. I hate it. All right. So I like Mockito, and I think that is wrong to mock static methods, but that's a different discussion. So what I want is an instance method so I can test it and I can mock it. So first of all, I need to introduce an instance method that does the same thing as the static one, so I can inject and mock. So now, what I want to do is to test drive what the static method does. In this case, it just throws an exception, so I'm going to keep it the same way. So that's what I expected to throw. So now I need an instance method to throw that. So I created create a class, call an instance method, passing the user. I just need to create the instance method now to that has the same behavior. So what I do is I make the instance method to call the static method. And right now, what I can do is I can start injecting tripDAO into other classes and start mocking it, the instance one. So I don't need to break anything else, because one question is, why don't you remove the static keyword from the original method? Because of course that if I do, we may have many other classes in the system calling that static method. And if I change the static method, it will break the entire system. And so I don't want to do that. I want to do the steps by step. So now I can have my entire system still calling the static method. And as I start working in some classes, I start injecting it and using the instance method. Once I get rid of all the calls to the static method, I can copy the behavior of the static method inside the instance method and get rid of that. So that's the intermediate step. So that's a good point to stop and commit. Awesome. So if I go back, so now what I want to do is I want to inject my trip DAO, and that would be the end of this session. So, but I want a failing test to justify this change. I want you to have a test that is broken because of that. So what I will do now, because all my tests are using the testable trip service. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to start creating tests that will force the use of the mock. So I'll be using Mockito, by the way. So sorry if you're not familiar with it, but I'm sure that it will be easy to understand if you are familiar with mocking. So first I'm telling my test class to run to use Mockito runner, and I'm gonna create my mock and a real instance, not a testable trip service, a real instance of the trip service. So I created a real trip service now, and I need to inject the mocks into it. So now I have the real trip service, and I have my trip DAO mock, and now I'm going to go to each test method and replace the calls to the testable trip service with the real trip service. So I save it. This one is using the real trip service now, all green. Same thing with this one, using the real one. And bang. So that's cool. So this one is throwing the collaborator call exception, because now it's not using the testable anymore. It's using the real one. So it's making a call to that static method on trip.io. So now I need to fix this test using the mock. So I create a instance of the, I define the trip DAO that will be injected by your Spring, your Google Juice, or whatever. And I replace that call with the instance one. So as I save it, so now it's still red, so I'm going to run. So now, as you can see, it changed. It's using my mock, because the exception that I'm getting from my test now is it was expected 2, but I got 0. Which means that it's using my mock, but my mock is not configured. If you remember, in the testable trip service, I'm returning the user trips, but now I'm not doing this anymore. I'm using a mock, so I need to have my mock configured to do exactly the same thing. So I'm going to use BDD Mockito to tell my mock that it should return this. So given that this method is called with the friend parameter, then I want it to return the friend trips. And as I save it, now I'm in the green. So which means that I don't need that method, the trips by, to be protected anymore. So I can start fixing my code now. So now this method is not needed anymore. An empty class we can delete. We don't need this anymore. Empty method with delete. Unused attribute with delete. And this real thing doesn't make sense to be real anymore. So now I don't have that mess anymore. My tests are far more readable. And as I said, when you start fixing your design, your tests become far easier to understand, much simpler. So TDD is not hard. What is hard is design software properly. So now is a good time to commit again. So to finish now, it's just a little bit of craftsmanship now. So there are a few things that I would love to do. There are, for example, when you look at a public method, you should look at all the instructions inside and see how balanced they are. And by balance, I mean, are they at the same level of abstraction? So, for example, this user is friends with logged in user, return trips by user. It's in one level of abstraction. New array list is a much lower level. This thing, this if statement, is far more detailed than the instruction below. So you need to start balancing your method. So let's try a few things. So validate logged in user. And this one, new array list, what is a new array list? What does it mean? No trips. That's what it means. So now you have all you have all the instructions inside your private method or your public method telling you the story at the same level of granularity. So they are balanced. That's what I call. And I will make a few changes on my tests just because I'm very picky with it. I'll show you. I don't want this to be here because it adds no value to me. It's just noise. So now I'm going to move some methods around. So the interesting thing is if I collapse this now, and then you look at the name of the methods, so should validate the logged in user. Validate logged in user. Just move it a little bit. So should return trips when users are friends. If user is friends with logged in user, return trips by user. Should not return any trips when users are not friends. If users are not friends, return no trips. So now you have your tests representing the behavior that you expect that class to have. So even at a unit level, you are describing the behavior of that class. So there's no technical low-level detail in there. And your public method on the other side tells you the story. So it tells what this functionality, this behavior is about. So first we validate the logged in user. Then we check if the user is friends with the logged in user. And if yes, we return the trips by that user. Otherwise, we return no trips. So I can sit down and pair with my BA or product owner and check with them, like, is this a valid business rule? Right? So, and if I want to know the details of what the validation means, then I go to the validation method or validation clause, where how I fetch that stuff from my persistence mechanism, that I can go to my trip DIO. But at that point, what I care is I need to understand what that functionality is about. And then I go just to the place that I'm interested to fix a bug or change something. But that's what this is about. So I'm going to commit that. So if you look at the last commits that I had since I started, so I had from bottom up in the selected code, I had unit tests created for the trip service, user builder created, is friends with another user, added to the user, trip service refactoring, logged in user injected into trip service. I have the entire history of what I've done. And if you see, of course, that I was explaining while I was doing that, because I could have done it much quicker. So the amount, like, is the amount of the number of minutes between each commit is quite small, like 6 minutes, 6 minutes, 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 4 minutes, 4 minutes. So I commit that often, because when you are refactoring code or even creating new code, sometimes we go towards directions that we don't want to go. As soon as we start exploring the code, we say, oh, I don't like this approach. So I could go back at any point in time and start again from there, or branch again from there, and then try a different approach. So that's why it's so important that you have that. So the takeaway from this session is, oh, by the way, that's the original trip service, and that's the other one. That's the new one. Even in a small piece of code, this one, on the left, you take, like, as I said, because I've done that, I asked people when I started this session, when I was doing that like in front of people, not through the web, and they would take like around 40 seconds to 60 seconds to start guessing what it does. The refactored one, it just takes the amount of seconds that you take to read it, right, like plain English. That's the advantage. Imagine the entire code base written like that. So the takeaways: when you are testing legacy code, forget about everything else. Just focus on the shallowest branch first. Write a test that represents that behavior, and then go to the second shallowest branch. So go from outside to the inside. You build your knowledge bit by bit. You build your test suite bit by bit. Your data, the amount of data that you need to pass in, you see where you are. And when you are refactoring, you do exactly the other way around. You start from the deepest branch and refactor from there, from the inside out. So there are a few things that, like, strive for simplicity. Try to express the business rules. Try to avoid tests that says it returns an array list. That doesn't mean anything. Right? So know your tools well, your shortcuts and stuff like that. It helps you a lot. Gives you a lot of productivity. So work in small increments as well. Commit often. So and as soon as you learn some techniques to work with legacy codes, you can embrace it. You can be brave and change things, because, like, it's not that hard. There's just like these techniques, they will solve like 90% of your problems in legacy code. They're very simple to do. So the more you practice and learn, you are not scared anymore. And yeah. So yeah, I have a book on craftsmanship. It's gonna be, yeah, it's not gonna be there anymore. It's gonna be published by a proper publisher, so it will change the title. But I'll probably say more about that on Twitter. So if you are interested, you can follow me on Twitter. And if you want to play with this exercise, there is my GitHub. So in my github.com, Sandro Mancuso /strip service kata, you can download this code. And I have versions of this code written in C#, in PHP, in Ruby, in many other languages. So you can play with it if you want to run this session in your companies. Just feel free to use it. So that's about it. I'm gonna go back to my browser. And how do I? Yes. So that's it.
Awesome, Sandro. That was a really awesome session, and I always love the sessions which dive straight into code, and that was really, really awesome. If anyone has any questions, please throw them into the IRC chat now. So a couple of questions that I currently got. One that I gave a stab at answering, but I'll ask you anyway, Sandro. When you injected logged in user, all the calls to the method will be called with a null. You fix them in the tests, but what happens in the production code? How would you fix that?
So that's what I said. So that was a dangerous refactoring. But as you were already on the backend code, and you were already using that singleton. So that means that that singleton is available everywhere for you. So if you had that done in there, you would have available everywhere else. So you would need to go to all these places. You need to figure out where that method under test was being called, and in there, call the singleton passing the logged in user. And then as you start refactoring them as well, at some point you get rid of all of them. Right, so as soon as everyone that needs a logged in user is receiving it, then chances are that you are going to get rid of it. But that's an intermediary step, but you need to go and find them and pass the logged in user from there.
Okay, awesome.
I just wanted to show. Yeah.
Cool. One question, in fact, he calls it a basic question. This is Allegro Jazz. He calls it a basic one, but I think it's actually quite an important one. We're talking about legacy code a lot. What do you define as legacy code? When does code become legacy?
1 second after it was written. So that's the answer. But the best definition that I've seen is Michael Feder's. Well, it's not the best. It's the one that I like the most. Is legacy code is code without tests. If you just listen to this phrase as it is with no context whatsoever, you say, nah, that's stupid. Like, I don't write tests and I write amazing code, right? So Trisha is asking me if I'm giving the session from my bed. The answer is yes. So I think that the reason Michael said that is, you may think that your code is amazing, but if I'm gonna work on your code, I'll be scared to touch because I don't know what it does. So that's when you start. So code that you are scared to touch and you don't do certain refactorings, even if you know that it's not that great and you would love to do some things, but you are so scared, that's when it becomes legacy. And I think that he summarized that not having tests, because if you have tests, you are not scared. So that's what he meant by it. So so it's not that it's the best one, but that's the one that I like for myself.
And Trisha also mentioned, I'm assuming this is Trisha G. She mentioned in Twitter, there's a nice little phrase actually. Those legacies. This is from Dan North. Those legacy systems you're ragging on about are what's running the shop. How about calling them current systems? I guess most of the time people consider legacy as just a huge amount of code that people don't understand but are too scared to touch, just in case, because everything runs through it anyway. Okay, another question from Michael. What do you think about isolating private methods in SUT the same way you isolated DAO objects in the example? Sometimes if we ignore them, the public method becomes easier to test.
I'm not sure if I understood the SUT thing, the system under test. So I'm not sure I understood exactly what the question was. So isolating the private methods. Sorry, can you say it again?
I'm asking Michael to elaborate. The question was, what do you think about isolating private methods in SUT the way you isolated DAO in the example? Sometimes if we ignore them, the public method becomes easier to test.
Isolating the private methods in the system under test. Isolating how? Exactly.
Well,
So
I've asked Mike to elaborate, so hopefully he'll.
yes, so I'm not quite sure how you can. I know how can I isolate a class like I've done. So it's a scene, but isolating a private method. Private method is part of the class that is being used by the public one. So I'm not quite sure exactly what he means. So I probably as soon as I understand that, I'll probably give a better answer.
Okay. Um, quick question from me actually about software craftsmanship. How would, if someone wanted to learn more about software craftsmanship, what resources are available, what user groups are available for people to grow?
So the thing is, like, one thing that needs to be very, very clear is when things like software craftsmanship, agile, they become more and more popular, the original message dilutes. So I think that a common mistake that we see today is that think that software craftsmanship is a thing that you learn and do. So software craftsmanship is more a mindset. It is your own attitude towards your career. Is I don't like to compare it to religion because that's not about it. But you know, when you, for example, if you name a design pattern, you know what people mean by that. If you say I'm a Catholic, or so people know what your values mean, or if you are any other religion. So or you belong to certain groups, or so in a way, it doesn't make it anyone better than anyone. But when you say I'm a software craftsman, it means I have this set of values. It doesn't mean that someone that doesn't call herself a craftsman doesn't share the same values. That doesn't mean that, or that I'm better than anyone else. So a craftsmanship for me is more a mindset, an attitude. It summarizes certain things that I do and behave and with my career and stuff. But I think that some of the things that we've seen in this session, for example. So if you want to know more about software craftsmanship, buy my book. Yeah. So that's that as well. But normally, software craftsmanship, because it's an ideology doesn't have practices. So the practices that we advocate, they come from the extreme programming. So extreme programming is a methodology, and methodology has practices. So all these things that I was doing here, test-driven development, and then like other things like pair programming, continuous integration, simple design, they are all extreme programming practices, and that we in the software craftsmanship world advocate because that's what we know best for now. So I would read Uncle Bob's books, and Martin Fowler and Kent Beck and Ron Jeffries and all these guys. And so I think that they produce amazing stuff on the technical side, and following these people and knowing what they are about is great. So, and I think that the one thing that I do the most, the best way for me to learn is creating pet projects. Take something that you love, be it music, sports, whatever, it doesn't matter, charity or whatever it is, create a software for that. Create an iPhone app or a website. And then in there, make it your Frankenstein. Try all the techniques. Try test-driven development. Try Scala combined with Clojure or functional programming or NoSQL. So that's what we normally do, personally and inside our company as well.
Okay, and one final question before we wrap up. This is from, how can I pronounce this? ECA Brera. Would you recommend any tool which finds dependencies between classes before refactoring?
No, I normally don't use them. I used them a long time in the past, but that was like 10 years ago, right? So I normally, as I use this approach of going from the shallowest branch to the deepest ones, I find them along the way. And just when they get in my way of testing, because I don't try to solve all the dependencies. Like if I'm dealing with a few hundreds of lines, I won't try to remove all the dependencies straight away. It will take me forever. So I will try to remove the one that I need to control in order to test. And once I have the safety net, even if I'm invoking some collaborators, if they are not harming my code, if they're just doing some in-memory validation, for example, I wouldn't bother, at least not at that moment. I would get my job done, and then I will make it better. So that's one of the reasons that I wouldn't bother. So if they get in my way, I solve them. Otherwise, I move on, get some stuff done, and then if I have time, I make the rest of the code better.
Okay, awesome. So we'll wrap things up there. A couple of things I just wanted to mention. First of all, a big shout out to Carl, who on this session on the session purchased a Geek Out UK ticket. Great job, see you there. The next session is Highly Strung, Understanding Your Type System. And that's on Monday the 28th of July at the same time as this session. And that's the speaker there is Samir Talwar. So Samir is one of the guys who works with you, right, Sandro?
Yeah, Samir is one of our craftsmen. Yeah, he's awesome.
And hopefully we'll get a session on TDD. That'll be in between these two sessions as well. So thanks very much. If anyone has any feedback on the Jug website in terms of performance or any improvements you'd like to see, please let me know. And I'd just like to finish off by saying a big thank you to Sandro. Sandro, we'll let you go back to bed and back to sleep now. Thanks very much for an awesome session, and see you again soon.
All right, cheers, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.